just easy to get very egotistical and say, oh, I'm the greatest and all that, and I'm not getting...
1991, London. The silence is louder than a bomb. Take a look at this house. This isn't a rock star's mansion. It's a crime scene where the victim locked the door from the inside. 8 feet of brick, a row of steel spikes cemented into the ridge. Who is the man the whole world adores hiding from? Outside the gates, the pack has already gathered. The mob with the lenses isn't waiting for autographs. They're waiting for a body bag. But inside, the golden cage has snapped shut. The curtains are drawn tight. In the dark, something is happening that no one is meant to see. Freddie Mercury has declared war on curiosity. He's preparing for his final curtain call, but the audience isn't invited to this show. For the headlines, it was just an intermission. For the inner circle, it was the end. The PR machine churned out alibis like a factory. The studio fed the world sedatives, exhaustion, knee problems, well-earned rest. The official story was simple. The king is tired. The king is resting. On paper, it looked like a strategic pause before a new tour. In reality, it was a death sentence. In Freddie Mercury's world, there are no coincidences. Whatever the spin, the timing stunk. The most electric frontman on the planet, a man who fed on the roar of the crowd, suddenly went invisible. It defied the physics of his nature. The press screamed questions. The handlers screamed, "No," even louder. But the volume of the denial told you everything you needed to know. Behind closed doors, rumors hardened into facts. People near the dressing rooms remember how the air changed with one sentence. Freddie didn't complain about the pain. He dropped one line, half joke, half warning, "Paint me thicker. I don't want them to see the cracks." We don't need insiders in expensive suits to get the truth. Suits lie to keep their paychecks. We need the people on the ground, the invisible ones. Ask the delivery guys backing vans up to the service entrance of Garden Lodge. They saw a different picture. They weren't hauling scripts or champagne. They were unloading boxes, lots of boxes. Week after week, the labels didn't promise a party. They promised survival. The drivers kept their mouths shut, but they knew. Music wasn't being delivered to this house anymore, only chemistry. Ask the makeup artists whose hands shook when they touched his skin. They didn't see a star, they saw the toll. Ask the gardeners tending his beloved pond. For years, Freddie greeted his koi every morning. It was a sacred ritual. Then, one day, the ritual broke. The water stayed still. The master vanished behind the heavy drapes of his bedroom. The atmosphere shifted instantly. White noise. The phone didn't just stop ringing, it was like it had been ripped out of the wall. Outside, the facade of the house gleamed with fresh paint. But inside, the machinery had ground to a halt. It was preparation for the final act. Freddie burned his last days of freedom to bury this truth. But accessing these files? It won't cost you a dime. Hit the subscribe button or scan the code. Help us keep picking the locks on doors they want to keep shut. It's the fuel that runs this operation. Now, back to the vultures waiting at the gate. Outside Garden Lodge, the laws of civilization were suspended. The street had turned into a war zone. Reporters lined the brick wall like bounty hunters. But they weren't holding rifles. They were holding telephoto lenses the length of a forearm. They weren't waiting for a statement. They weren't waiting for the truth. They were sighting a target. This wasn't journalism. This was a war of attrition. Photographers hung from the trees of neighboring lots, snapping branches. They propped ladders against fences and climbed onto the roofs of vans, turning a quiet Kensington street into an arena of cruelty. They paid kids cash to scale the walls. They laid siege to the fortress, testing every inch of the perimeter for weakness. Their goal was simple: one frame, one photo of the monster. In the backrooms of the tabloids, a number was floating around that would make your blood run cold. Word on the street was that the first picture of a dying Freddie was worth £100,000. That was a fortune. The contract promised gold, but the fine print demanded blood. The blood of a man who just wanted to die in his own bed. That number turned men into jackals. They worked in shifts, passing the watch like soldiers on the front line. They ate, slept, and smoked right at the gates, turning an elite neighborhood into a dump. The air around the house stank of cheap tobacco and greed. Ask the drivers trying to haul out trash or bring in food. Every trip through those gates was like running a blockade. Men with cameras hurled themselves onto the hoods. They hammered the glass with their lenses, demanding the beast show his face. They didn't care about safety. They needed a headline. The contrast was unbearable. Inside the walls, a sterile, museum-quality silence reigned. Freddie had surrounded himself with the beauty he'd collected all his life. Japanese prints, antique furniture, the scent of lilies and fresh linens. In there, time moved slowly, carried by the whispers of close friends and the purring of cats. It was a temple of art. It was the only place left on Earth where he was still a human being, not a mark. But 6 feet away, on the other side of the brickwork, the butcher shop was open for business. Show business took off the mask. They didn't see a great musician anymore. To the Sunday editors, he was just a side of beef on a hook. In the newsrooms, nobody was praying for his recovery. They were placing bets on the expiration date. As long as you're fresh, they polish you and put you in the window. But when you start to spoil, the butcher shop doesn't close. It just changes the price tag. Now, they were trading in his decay. This wasn't just bad press. It was hate. Back then, the rags ran headlines that would get you arrested today. One columnist didn't even blink when he printed the line, "I'd shoot my son if he had AIDS." That was the reality Freddie was living with behind that wall. The butcher shop wasn't just peddling papers. They were selling a death sentence to an entire generation. Every time the gates cracked open to let a doctor's car through, the silence was shredded by the rattle of hundreds of shutters. It sounded like machine gun fire. The flashes assaulted the eyes, even through tinted glass. Freddie became a prisoner in his own castle. He could hear their voices through the walls. He couldn't step into the garden. He couldn't go near a window. The curtains were drawn tight, turning a sunny day into permanent twilight. He knew, if he moved that fabric even an inch, the hunters would claim their prize. They wanted to see him broken. They wanted to sell his pain in the morning edition, but he denied them that pleasure. While the siege raged outside, inside Garden Lodge, another war was being fought. A war for control over the closing credits. Freddie Mercury had spent a lifetime building himself into a monument. He was the architect of his own legend, but monuments have an enemy worse than vandals: time. And in 1991, time was working him over with the cruelty of a sadist. He looked in the mirror and didn't see himself. He saw the disease trying to turn him into a caricature. The industry and the doctors offered to keep the party going. They pushed new drugs, new procedures, new masks. They wanted to preserve him, to force him to play the role of a living man when his body was already demanding rest. They didn't want a human being. They needed an exhibit for the wax museum. Stand still, smile through the grit, and don't you dare crumble, or we lose money. They were ready to keep the spark alive at any cost, even if all that remained of the man was a shell. But Freddie wasn't a puppet. He was the puppet master. He understood. A little longer, and the great pretender would vanish. All that would be left was a body on a hospital bed, inviting pity. And for a king, pity is an insult. He didn't want to be an exhibit of decay. He wanted to stay forever young in memory, frozen mid-air at Wembley Stadium, not strapped into a wheelchair. But the body laid down its own terms. Peter Freestone recalls the brutal reality of those final days. The legs that had conquered the world could no longer hold their master. His bodyguard had to scoop him up and carry him through the house like a child, granting him one last look at his paintings. It was a farewell tour of his own private museum. The decision didn't come from despair. It came from strength. Those who stood watch by his bedside in those days remember the turning point. A heavy pause hung in the room. Freddie looked at the battery of pills that were extending his life but stealing his dignity. They say he didn't argue with the doctors. He simply delivered a verdict, quiet and sharp as a blade. The show must go on, but without me. It was an act of absolute will. On November 10th, he did something few are capable of. He refused the medication that was tethering him to this world. He didn't surrender. He hit the stop button. He pulled the plug himself, before the lights had a chance to flicker. It was his final directorial move. He decided it was better to step into the dark now than let the disease dictate the script of the finale. The room changed instantly. The medical hustle vanished. The waiting took up residence in the bedroom. It was the silence before an entrance onto a stage from which there is no return. The engine had been cut. All that was left was for the momentum to run out. He timed his exit perfectly, cutting the feed before the tabloids could feast on the wreckage. By locking the golden cage from the inside, he denied the butcher shop its trophy and left the legend untouchable. The man faded to black, but the icon, never.